especially coming into this time of the year, towards the end of the year, people are always interested and curious about trends and predictions. And I couldn't be more excited to be joined by somebody who I would consider years ahead of our times. Mark Schaefer is joining us as today's guest, and he has not written one best-selling book or two, he's written 9 books all up, and definitely way ahead of our time. So with that, thank you so much for joining us, Mark.
I'm delighted to be here, Petra.
Thank you so much. Now, when I say you're ahead of the time, I mean it. I've been following your research, your content, your podcast, your blog for many years. But in preparation for this interview, I actually also went back to podcast interviews that you gave back to in 2012, 2015. And you gave insights and statements that couldn't be more relevant to today's economy. The question is, how do you spot trends that are worth pursuing?
I'd be curious to find out what you found all the way back in 2012 or 2013.
Oh, so many things from.
Yeah, well, I definitely have a good track record of doing that, and I'm not sure how I can really do it. It's something I discovered maybe in my 30s. A lot of people figure out what they're good at when they're in their teens or in their 20s. And it took me a long time. I could sort of see how trends come together. And a lot of times people see something going on in our world and they get immersed in what's happening right now. But I like to think through, what are the implications of this? What happens if things just keep on going in that way? How does it affect our system? How does it affect our careers and our world? One of the most famous articles I wrote was the one about content shock back in 2014. And I was concerned by what I was experiencing, by what my customers were experiencing, and I could see that the world was getting filled up with content. And as people got on board and decided to be creating more and more content, that is going to be harder to compete. It was going to be harder to stand out. It was going to be even harder to afford to promote or sponsor content. And so that in that day, and when I wrote that, I mean, it was a radical idea. It was a really controversial idea. I think I had over 1,000 comments on that post. It was about a full-time job for 3 weeks, but I was right, because I could see it in sort of economic terms, that whenever you have too much or too little of something in a system, that something has to change, something has to give. And it's the same thing with content and marketing. So I do spend a lot of time just kind of watching for trends. It's something I enjoy, especially, Petra, if there's a headline that I see that makes me scratch my head and go, that doesn't make sense. And then I dig deeper, and usually I can learn something quite interesting.
That's fascinating. And this is what makes you one of the leading marketing futurists. But I would say your insights and your research translates into so many other aspects. So you wrote, for example, the book, Crack the Influencer, or Influencer Code. And that was in 2014, when influencer marketing wasn't necessarily a thing. Nowadays, where we see that companies and hierarchies are getting leaner and hierarchies are getting flatter, the only way to actually stand out through your thought leadership is through influence, not necessarily by title. So would you also see that your research translates into, say, the corporate world, not necessarily just in a business sense?
Oh, definitely. And I consult to a lot of big companies. They see these trends happening, and they want to be on the leading edge. I think it's a lot easier for smaller companies and individuals to change compared to these big companies, but I'm willing to listen and help.
Excellent. Now, one of your insights was also that in order to become known, you need to identify an area that you have a sustainable interest in. Can you expand on what that actually means, and what's the difference to pursuing your passion that everyone is honing in on?
Well, there's a lot of hype on the internet about, follow your dreams and follow your passions. And sometimes it doesn't really work out. And I think that's not necessarily how the world works. I mean, I think you should follow your dreams, but if you want to make it into a business, then there has to be enough people on the other end who care about it. Okay. So an example would be many years ago, someone signed up for a personal coaching call with me, and he was a person who collected autographs. And he thought he was the world's best autograph collector, and he wrote a book about collecting autographs. And that was his passion. He just lived it and breathed it every day. But he was struggling to turn it into a business because there weren't enough people who cared about that. It's kind of a small world of people who love to collect autographs. He probably knows all of them. And it just wasn't big enough to turn into a business. So that was his passion. His passion probably needed to stay as a hobby. And what I'm suggesting in the book, a better way to frame it, is a sustainable interest. Now, it could be your passion. If your passion is scalable, if your passion potentially has a large fan base, then yes. But there's lots of exercises in the known book to try to focus on that intersection between what do you love, because you've got to spend a lot of time with it. It's got to be something that you love, but also something that's sustainable for years. It's sustainable because there's people on the other side that care about it. So it's a different way to frame the whole, follow your dreams thing. Maybe you should, but maybe it shouldn't be a business.
That's such a good point, because it very much is the intersection between what can you bring to the world and what the world actually needs. And my question also in terms of you identifying trends that are worth pursuing is because you're very early with your insights and with your predictions, how do you know that it's going to be a bigger thing and an idea worth pursuing? So I give you an example. I started talking about employer branding 7 years ago, and companies were like, oh, you know what, we're good. We have talents enough to come to us. Nowadays, everything has changed. And after about 12 months, 18 months, I said, obviously, I'm too early. I'm handing the towel in and I'm focusing on personal branding. When is an idea too early to pursue or too early to give up?
That's a really, really good question. And so actually, I talk about that in a lot of depth in my new book, Cumulative Advantage, which is sort of like Known Part 2 in a way. I mean, Known talks about the foundational ideas of building a personal brand, and Cumulative Advantage talks about building momentum for that brand. And one of the concepts in there is timing. How do you know? And I studied so much about this. I read so much about this, and the answer is you don't know. You never really know. There's always some risk. There's almost no guarantee that you can get the timing right. But what you can do is there's some exercises in the Cumulative Advantage book that help people sort of create a stronger opportunity for good timing, to make sure you've got everything ready, that you've done all the research and you've asked all the questions that you can. So if the timing is right, you're ready to go. I mean, it's a big deal. And I think once you try it, once you start working on it, as long as you see indicators that it's working, keep going. As long as you're being invited to be on podcasts, or people are saying, hey, I want to leave you a comment because I really loved your show, or can I be on your show? Or as long as you're starting to see those qualitative measures of success, that you're becoming known, keep going, because it sort of bubbles along, and then all of a sudden it starts to go up. And the biggest problem with people pursuing an idea is that they quit too soon. So as long as you're seeing some progress, keep on going.
That's such a good point, because nothing happens overnight. And what we're currently seeing, and I'm really curious to get your take on this, is what's called the Great Resignation, that very talented professionals resigning from their corporate job and start their own business. Your book, Known, was written in 2017, but I would say it's now important more than ever before, because the world, the online space, has become noisier and more crowded, and people think they just need to put up their website, write a couple of blogs, and they get the traction. And it's not the case. What have you seen as in the changes between 2017 and 2021? And where's the trend going next year?
Well, I think it's exactly as you say, is that it is getting more crowded, more noisy, more difficult. I think all of the things I talked about, back around 2014, 2015, as far as predicting where this is going to go with content and being difficult to compete are certainly coming true. I also don't think that should really dissuade anybody. I think that everyone has their own source of originality. Everyone has their own ability to add their own story, their own narrative to content to help them create a personal brand. And certainly there are new successes emerging all the time. And again, I think the book Known, which is about personal branding, really can get people working in the right areas and directing them to the right areas. I think today, one of the things that we have to really take seriously is this idea of nonconformity. So back when, content was just beginning to fill the web and people were starting to establish personal brands, it was a novelty. So you could stand out just by doing it, because there weren't any blogs and there weren't any podcasts, especially if you were a company. Today, everybody is doing it. There's thousands and thousands and thousands. We have so much competition for our attention, which is more than obvious. And I think what we have to do is think about how are we nonconformists instead of conformists. Today, I posted something on LinkedIn that said, I'm really frustrated that there are people who do interviews like this, who they have the same set of questions for every single interview. Now, here's what makes you great. You studied me. You did research on me. You've been following me. So you know how to get, you're asking questions I haven't been asked before. That's going to make a great show for you, right? So you are a nonconformist. We have to zig when other people are zagging. We have to create something that really is a show, something that is provocative, something that has entertainment value, because that's what it takes to compete. So I think that's really the big difference, is the pressure on creating something that's compelling or maybe even audacious to stand out today.
That's such a great point, because it actually doesn't require that much. You just need to go this little extra step or look at a problem or a challenge from a different angle. And because of your different background, your experience, your education, your personality, you are already different.
Yeah, I was talking to someone the other day. He works for an agency in Atlanta, and he wanted to start a podcast or a video series where he would interview different people. And I said, the last thing the world needs is 2 more talking heads. And he's a creative agency. So I said, how do you just blow it apart? How do you make it different? How do you show that you're truly a creative agency? Be creative. Don't just interview people like everybody else interviews people. You've got to find some way to be compelling. I think that's a big idea. I'm actually creating an online course, my first online course about personal branding. And I'm really excited about it. And I'm doing it through Maven. And I've been studying under this woman, one of the co-founders, Wes Cow, who's a brilliant, brilliant woman. And she said, She had something interesting. She said she thinks the key to success and standing out is to have a spiky point of view. I'm actually writing a blog post about that. I think that's really a wonderful way to put it. And a spiky point of view is something that's it's different. It's provocative. It's something that can be debated. And as I look back at my own career and what I've written about, boy, have I been spiky. And if you look back at all of the articles that you're talking about, it's like, it's something that I sort of know is true, but not everybody thinks it's true. And I call it out and I say, look, everyone, it's just not the way it is. So anyway, I think I'm Mr. Spiky on the internet, but I like that. Standing out through a spiky point of view.
But I guess this is also why you don't just have one best-selling book, but many of them, and always ahead of the time. So I'm really curious also to get your take on senior leaders and executives and the C-suite to be on social media. Nowadays, when we want more transparency and more authenticity, is it required for senior leaders to be on social? And if so, what is the biggest mindset that they might need to overcome when it comes to having a strong point of view, but then also potentially copying the negative and the critics?
Sure. Well, I think there's a big upside and there's a big downside. I wrote in my book, Marketing Rebellion, how the customer is now the marketer, and that these customers who are being our advocates, they don't trust us. They don't trust businesses. They don't trust brands. They don't trust advertising, but they trust each other. We trust each other. We trust human beings. We trust our friends. We trust our neighbors. We trust these people who we call influencers, who are really just our friends that we trust. We just have never seen them in real life. We just follow them online. And we trust company leaders and founders. So increasingly, the personal brand is the brand. You're the face of the brand. You're the face of the company. And I think there's a lot of great examples of that. Elon Musk is probably the greatest, right? He's not a perfect person, but he's probably the greatest entrepreneur of our generation. And he's someone that people believe in. And so, that's basically what's running Tesla right now, to a large extent, is just the power of his personal brand. He is the brand. Tesla does not advertise. Mercedes-Benz spends $900 per car on advertising. Tesla spends zero. A lot of that is because the power of the personal brand. I think that's especially compelling for a small to medium-sized business, because the founder, your customers, you're out there meeting with your customers, you are the face of the brand. For a bigger company, it's more difficult. And there is a downside of the haters out there and the trolls out there and the people that can cause you a lot of problems. So I think overall, the opportunity outweighs the problems. To answer your question, I don't think necessarily it's a necessity for every executive to do it. If you don't want to do it, if you're not comfortable doing it, then don't do it, and don't force anybody to do it. But if it's something that a person can embrace and really enjoy, then that is a very powerful asset for a company.
And that actually also has a ripple effect, because it doesn't necessarily need to be the leader of the organization. It could also be employees, and they're the best advocates for an organization.
Sure.
Having said that, at the same time, so many leaders are also quite cautious about their employees building their own personal brand. What advice would you give them for those who say, you know what, I actually want to build my profile. I want to have, share my bigger idea, but my company doesn't support me.
I remember when I was a young guy growing up in business, we were always afraid of losing our best salesperson. This salesperson was so good they've got the biggest Rolodex file and they know all our customers and our customers just love this person. What would happen to us if that person left the company? Well, sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't. But that doesn't mean that you don't have a rock star on your team. You definitely want to have a rock star on your team. And today, that rock star is probably the person with the best personal brand on your team, right? And chances are, depending on your industry, there might be people in your industry who know one of your employees more than they know you. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. And I think it's something that you should even support and amplify. And I've done a lot of work in that area for big companies too. How do we get employees to lift their personal brands? Because again, people aren't going to believe our ads, even if they see them, which they're probably not anymore. We're in the streaming age, but we do see content from others, and that's what we believe, and that's what we share, and that's what builds the narrative about your company, what's being shared by others. So I think generally it makes good sense, but it also takes an element of giving up control. Just like always having that fear of losing your best salesperson, there's nothing you can do to control that. You just have to say, we're going to do our best. We're going to encourage that person. We're going to reward that person. We're going to compensate that person fairly. And, hopefully they'll stay around. And I think it's the same with any employee today.
That's so true. You also mentioned that we trust peers and people a lot more than brands and companies and media. And it actually is a all-time record low in terms of trust when it comes to media. You also mentioned in one of your interviews that trust is a big differentiator. So the question is, how do you build trust, especially in this day and age, as an individual, as a business, as a small business?
Yeah. Well, I think the biggest thing is honesty. I mean, a lot of people use this word authenticity, and I don't necessarily think that's the best word. I had a conversation today about a guy who is struggling with, well, he needs to find work, and he's also struggling with some mental health issues. And of course, it's good to find help for that. It's time. All the traction around normalizing mental health issues and keeping this in a public conversation, just like we would talk about COVID or talk about heart attacks or something like that. That's all very good and healthy. But at the same time, if he's looking for work and he's suffering from anxiety and depression and has a hard time getting out of bed, and that's what he's posting online, and the other person I'm looking at hiring doesn't have any problem getting out of bed, I'm going to hire the person that can get out of bed and come to work, right? Mm-hmm. That's just human nature. I don't want to sound cold or crass. I don't want to sound dispassionate or uncaring, but I think we have to strike a balance. If our goal is to help other people with these issues, then by all means, share and share and share and share and share. There's also ways we can share in private or in groups and not make that our personal brand. But we just have to be careful that everything we do and everything we don't do, everything we say and everything we don't say becomes part of the personal brand. And if you are having trouble at work, you need to sort of burnish that brand in a positive way. So, being authentic means like being real about everything. And I think a better word is honesty, is just being honest, being true, showing up in an honest way. I think it's good and helpful and useful to disclose some things in your life, because it sends a message about what you believe in and what you care about and what you value. So I call that strategic authenticity, which is like the yuckiest word in the world. I know that. And but I don't have a better word for it. But it's like, okay, I want to send a message that I enjoy the outdoors, or that I work with this charity, and that this is something important to me, right? It sends a message about this is who I am as a person, and I hope I have values and beliefs that attract you as well. It's the same thing. Everything is being so polarized from a political standpoint, not just in America, but everywhere in the world. And this guy wrote me this message about how he took a strong political position on something, and he put up all these posters in his store and everything. And the next thing you know, he had protesters outside his store. And he said, this just isn't fair. This just isn't fair. And I said, you just made a bad business decision. You thought that these political views were more important than, attracting customers to your music store. Buying a musical instrument is not a political, it's not a political decision. You made a political choice. And if that's the most important thing to you, then okay, but you made a bad business decision.
This is so spot on. And I think the one word that would sum it up is being intentional about it. Mm-hmm. The strategic authenticity. Do I need to show everyone how I look when I get up in the morning and feel really awful? Probably not. Right. Nobody cares.
Nobody cares.
No.
Nobody cares about the poopy diapers or the sick dog, or, and so I think it is, I don't necessarily think it has to be your shiny best self. I go out of my way to talk about, disappointments and bad things that happen, because I want to be a real person. I don't want to be put up on a pedestal. I want people, it's important for me to not show my shiny best self all the time. And because I just, I don't want to be seen I don't want to be seen as so different as everybody else.
This is, also I think what comes down to you building your personal brand that resonates on a much bigger level, because you share content that is relevant and creates value, because you share your learnings and the struggles and how you've overcome it, rather than just saying, I really feel awful and you should too. Because that doesn't do anything. In your book, Content Code, you actually mentioned that you need to have badass content. And again, it could be more relevant in today's world. Can you talk us through what actually these days moves content? Because this is exactly what creates this commercial value when it is shared. Sure.
Well, again, I am so impressed at the research that you did. I'm very humbled and grateful. So the idea that I proposed in the content code is, again, it was sort of one of these spiky point of view moments that everybody was creating content. Everybody was creating content. And I saw this statistic that 80% of the content on a B2B website on average is never seen. And so then there was another article in the Wall Street Journal, I believe, that said, well, all this content marketing, it's not working. And so the next thing is that people are trying to invest in SEO. And I thought, well, that's not going to work either, because with SEO, you can trick people into clicking a link, but you can't trick them into reading it. You can't trick them into sharing it. And that is the power. You and I started the conversation talking about influence. Here's my definition of influence. It's super, super simple. If you can move content, you are an influencer. That's all it is on the web, not in your home, not in your school, not at work, but on the web. You're an influencer if you create or share content that moves, content that people want to spread. Because again, nobody sees our ads, nobody believes our ads, but they believe the content from others. When people share your content, it's advocacy. People are standing up in a virtual way saying, I believe in this. I want you to believe in this. This entertained me. I hope this entertains you today. I'm having a bad day and this made me smile. I want to pass this on to you. That is the most powerful form of marketing we can imagine. when people are taking a personal stand to advocate something that we're doing. And that is really the mindset that is required today to succeed. It's not about bragging about yourself or saying how great you are. It's how do we earn our way into the customer narrative? 2/3 of our marketing is occurring through others. 2/3 of our marketing is by what people are talking about, what they're sharing on social media, testimonies, reviews, what they're hearing from influencers. And effective marketing today is about how do we create a story that earns our way into that narrative and is told by others. So it goes all the way back to that book, The Content Code. Is the idea is exactly the same. And that's why, I mean, that book is evergreen in some ways, in that the power of digital marketing, the only power of digital marketing is really through, is that content being seen and shared by other people.
And this also creates a lot bigger movement, because you get the social proof, you get the buy-in, your message is shared by others. And it's not just you saying, you know what, this is the best, I'm the best, whatever it might be, it's others supporting this. And this is probably also where it comes down to getting the cumulative advantage. This is where you get the momentum through the power of others.
Mm-hmm. Yes, 100%. Because that's really where the credibility is today. And it's not just awareness and believability, but we see this massive movement toward everything around influencers. I relaunched my podcast this week. I used to have a co-host. Now I'm going to have rotating co-hosts, and I'm relaunching the show. And my first new co-host out of 6 that I'm rotating, we got into this amazing discussion. He's calling this young generation Generation I, because it's all about influence. It's all it is. And there was a statistic that I saw, Petra, that like 55% of young people, the only reason they go to the web is to see what their favorite influencer posted today. It's an influence economy. It's just an influence economy. And there's going to be, we talked about on the show, how there's going to be this gigantic merging of influencers and brands and retail. We talked about this vision where brick and mortar retail stores would have creator spaces, right? Would have live streaming centers. It makes all the sense in the world. Why wouldn't you sponsor an influencer tour, right? So you're a big chain, I don't know. I'm not a big retail junkie, right? So the first brand that comes to my mind is the Gap. The Gap's still a store, right? I think it's still a store. So the Gap has hundreds and hundreds of stores. What if you had, influencers visiting your stores, and so all their fans want to come to your store, and they're creating content with their fans, and the fans get to try different things. That's where it's going to go. There's going to be this merging of experiences and live streaming and influence, and it's going to be everything. We started seeing this during the pandemic, when a lot of retail brands really became producers of fashion shows, online fashion shows, and all online variety shows. And there was another trend that was emerging in China called live commerce, where they had influencers sort of like selling and having impulse buys and engaging and actually talking to the shoppers. And it's very, very exciting, and that I see that catching on in America too. So it's just super exciting. I think marketing is being redefined in front of us. I think that we won't even recognize marketing 2 years from now.
And I think that's the most exciting part. And as much as it applies to businesses, I would also say that very much applies to individuals who want to build their own personal brand, to build their own service-based consultancy, for example, because they need to do something different, and just saying we are open, website is up, come and run the door in, it's not going to happen. And you also mentioned in your book, Known, that content creation is a big cornerstone to become known, because otherwise how would people know what you stand for? And
Right.
I often get the feedback saying, oh, but I'm too busy, I don't even know what to talk about. How would you answer this question?
Oh, that is the question. That's probably the question I get asked most of all. The other day, I was doing a consulting call with just one of the loveliest individuals I've ever known. He's just an inspiring man. He was a Somalian immigrant to the UK, and he was just recently named the Entrepreneur of the Year for the City of London. And he's so shy and he's so humble, and he wants to work on his personal brand. So he started telling me about, well, Mark, I wanted to do this, I wanted to work on this, but everything went wrong. This went wrong, and this went wrong, and this went wrong. And I had to solve the problem this way, this way, this way, this way. And I said, in the last 5 minutes, you just gave me ideas for 5 amazing pieces of content. You had this problem, here's how you solved it. You had this opportunity, here's what you made of it. And it's basically just looking at it takes some courage. It does. It takes some courage. And I don't know how to fix that. I really don't. And I struggle because I talk to a lot of people who just say, I'm fearful and I'm afraid to put myself out there, and I've got imposter syndrome. And no matter what you do to encourage them and build them up, it doesn't really solve it. It's got to be internalized some way. And I don't know how to do that, quite frankly. It's maybe, one of the failures of my life, but I can give them, I can be honest with them, and I can tell them the truth that your story does matter. It does matter. And even if these stories have been told before, they haven't been told by you, and they haven't been told from your perspective. Your heritage, your education, your family background, from the dark places, from the bright places of your life. So the only way to really stand out in the world is to be original. And the only way to be original is to add your story. You really don't have a choice. So it's literally as simple as that. And a lot of people tend to overthink it. And I did too when I was starting out. I thought everything I write has to be a PhD thesis to show everybody how smart I am. And that was just dumb. What people just really want to do is they want to connect. They want a new idea. They want a new experience. They want some emotional attachment to me. And that can come through the silliest little story that I tell. It doesn't have to be profound. It doesn't have to be important, but it does have to be relevant. It has to be interesting. It has to be timely, and maybe even a little entertaining. So, but I think at the bottom, it takes courage to start. And I know it does take time, but the most successful people that you look up to, they have the same amount of time as you. So it gets down to priorities. Do you want to do it or not? And look, let's face it. If you want to create consistent content, that can be as little as a 3-minute video every week. You could take 1 hour from your week and probably create enough videos to populate at least a month. So, I mean, if you just have, little ideas that you can make simple 3-minute videos, you're on your way. Do it in an hour. It doesn't have to be Hollywood. It doesn't have to be produced. My presence on the web is very, very simple. It's one take, one camera. The camera is usually a smartphone. But it is honest, and I do have the courage to tell my story, and that's at its essence is what it takes to succeed.
Absolutely. And you covered such a good point to start, and this is also how you refine your message, because we often think in our head, oh, it totally makes sense, and the second we say it out loud, even we confuse ourselves because it actually doesn't make sense. So trialing and testing and getting feedback from your message, from your story, this is exactly what gets you to become actually known for it, because we can't just put something out there and expect it to be perfect, because it's not going to be like that.
I mean, I think we need to have an image in our minds that all these people that we look up to, and we have this imposter syndrome that we don't think that we belong there. Nobody started there. Nobody started there. When I started blogging, I had no idea what I was doing. I was terrible. I had no idea what I was doing. But I said, hey, look, I tried this on my blog and it really worked. And I tried this on my blog and hey, I made a new friend and this happened. And so I was sharing my successes. I was sharing my failures. And I think 5 years after I started blogging for the first time, I wrote the best-selling book on blogging. But I didn't write the best-selling book on blogging because I was born an expert. I wrote it because I did it and failed for 5 years until I started getting it right.
And that requires courage. And people often, they don't necessarily want to not be seen to start something. They don't want to be seen to fail, quote unquote, and doing something. Yeah. But this is exactly, I always say you need to embrace the suck. It's just part of the game.
Yeah. Yeah. And I had the same conversation with somebody today who is, again, trying to overcome all these personal anxieties and insecurities. And I said, well, if you create this piece of content, what's the worst thing that can happen in the next 7 minutes after you do it? What's the worst thing that can happen in the next 7 days? How is that going to impact you 7 years from now? Well, 7 days from now or 7 weeks from now, it's not going to matter, right? 7 years from now, certainly not. If you imagine the very worst thing in your mind that could ever happen, it's not going to matter. It's just not going to matter. So put it in perspective and take the leap.
Yes, absolutely. Now I'm curious, what was your driver, your motivation to actually press the publish button at your very first blog or social media post?
I was really just pursuing curiosity. I didn't really have a good plan. I was, I started my company in 2008. I worked for a big multinational company for many years. I started my own business in 2008. And back then, social media was really hot. It was just beginning to go mainstream as a marketing practice. And so I needed to immerse myself in it. I needed to be there. I needed to do it. I couldn't help other people if I wasn't doing it myself. So I started a blog as an experiment. And some weeks I thought, well, I'll do it. Some weeks I was too busy. I didn't do it. And then after about 9 months, Petra, I realized that every positive thing that was happening for my business was coming through the blog. New customers, new collaborators, new inspiration, new ideas, new friends. And I thought, I need to commit to this. I need to get more serious about this. And that's when I decided to really double down on the blog. And I blogged, and I blogged 650 weeks in a row.
Insane.
And I never missed. And I've had a podcast for 9 years. Never missed an episode. Through COVID.
Well, it shows your commitment to making an impact, to showing up, to consistently reinventing yourself also, because your content has shifted and changed and you've made it very relevant to what's happening right now and what's to come, which is probably a good way to wrap up. What is next for you? What are you seeing for 2021 for your personal, your professional life, but also for the economy that we are going to face?
Well, personally, as I mentioned, I'm working on this online class. I'm really excited about that because it's live. It's not recorded. It's going to be all me. That's going to be a lot of fun. The other thing I'm so excited about is I'm just hoping that the world will achieve some sense of stability and be normal enough that I have a live event called The Uprising. And it's a retreat for marketing thought leaders. And it's the best thing I've ever done in my career. And I've had to cancel it for 2 years. We've kind of done an online event, but it brings these people together at a wooded lodge in Tennessee, and we have great food, and we're surrounded by hiking trails, and we think big thoughts for 3 days, and it's magical. And that will be the highlight of my year if we can pull that off. And I'm always pushing. I'm always looking at new ideas, and I've got a few ideas bubbling, maybe for a new book that would be out maybe around in early 2023. So I'd have to be starting on that pretty soon. But working on a book is such a big commitment in every way, psychologically, and your time and your career, and also physically. I mean, I'm exhausted by the time I finish writing and publishing a book. So, I mean, it's a big, big decision, and I have to know this is the right idea. This is the right book, because, and this is a great way to wrap up the show, because everything I do, Petra, whether it's a blog post or a podcast or an interview with you or a book, there's only one thing in my mind, and it's this: I will never let you down. If you spend time with me, it's going to be worth your time. It's going to be interesting. You're going to learn something. Maybe you'll even have some fun along the way, but wherever I am, I'm not going to let you down. And so the next book, I only have one goal. It's got to be better than the last book.
Well, the stakes are high. I've read all of your books, I have to confess here, and they're all incredible. Like, there's not one page that you would say, I kind of knew it. Or
Thank you. That's the nicest thing you could have ever said to me.
Yes. Well, as I said, I've been following your research, your work for many, many years. I'm probably one of those people. I think I know you. You're my best buddy, and you have no idea. It's because you are in my ear. You are, in front of me when I'm reading a book. So I have no doubt that your next book is going to be another bestseller.
Well,
now,
good.
Where can everyone find to connect with you, learn more about you and your work?
Well, it's easy to find me on businessesgrow.com, because nobody can remember how to spell Schaefer. So that wasn't even an option for my website name. And you can find my blog, my podcast, my books, and all my social media connections there.
Excellent. Well, I really enjoyed the conversation. You shared so many valuable and practical insights and tips, tricks, and experiences, which I really appreciate. So thank you so much for being here today, Mark.
Thank you. You did a great job with this interview.
Thank you so much.